do something on this already? Didn't you guys do an article on this? Yeah, but there's a thing with him on it, right?
Yeah, Steve did the article.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had some nice pictures. Yeah.
No, he's better looking.
GQ magazine pictures.
He's better looking. He's got to have him.
Like it. All set?
Yeah.
Good morning. I am Mike HIgginbotham, Wilson Elkins Professor of Law here at the University of Baltimore, and I'm also the chair of the Attorney General's Task Force on Electronic Weapons. Along with my vice chair, Byron Warnken, also of the University of Baltimore, I would like to welcome all of you to the university and to this press conference today. We will proceed as follows. I will speak for 10 minutes. Professor Warnken will then come on, speak for about 5 minutes or less. Then we will officially present the report to Attorney General Gansler. He will speak, and then we will open it up for questions and answers. Mr. Attorney General, members of the press, members of the university, and guests. About a little over 12 months ago, Attorney General Gansler asked me to create a task force to examine the use of electronic weapons in Maryland. It was one of the first times, if not the first time, that a statewide examination had been conducted of electronic weapons. I must say that when I think back on this time, I was like a deer in the headlights. I didn't even know what an electronic weapon was. But today, 12 months later, I stand before you, 15 members strong in terms of a task force, 100 pages in terms of a report, and prepared to perhaps give the 5 sweetest words an elected official could ever hear. And those 5 words are on time and within budget. What we're going to do today is, before I talk about process and content and value of this report, what we're going to do today is introduce the members of the task force to everyone. I will do that quickly and in alphabetical order. Don Alves is a medical doctor. He is affiliated with Johns Hopkins University, and he's also the medical director of the state police. Cindy Boersma, legislative director of the ACLU of Maryland. Carol Crawford, first assistant state's attorney for the office of the state's attorney, Montgomery County. Carrie Hansel, attorney, Joseph Greenwald and Lake. Scott Hammock, attorney, O'Melveny and Myers. Christy Lopez, attorney, independent assessment and monitoring. James Johnson, chief of police, Baltimore County. George McKinney, United States Marshal, retired. Ken Meekins, chief of police, Hampstead. Carl Pelton, UMBC graduate student in emergency health services and consulting paramedic. Vernon Ricks, state chair, NAACP of Maryland, state chair of law enforcement. Mark Warren, major, Baltimore County Police. They are, as you have heard, and as you will see, they are experienced, they are accomplished, they are dedicated, and they are articulate. But most important, they have a trait that is equally as valuable to completing this report. And that trait is they are willing to listen to divergent points of view. We would not have been able to get this 100-page report finished, and presented today without that particular trait. As you can imagine, when you have the NAACP and the ACLU in the same room with law enforcement, differences of opinion may arise. And when you throw lawyers and doctors in the mix, you can in fact expect perhaps World War III. But candidly, we were able to work all of those issues, all of those arguments, we were able to work them out. And the reason why we were able to do that is because folks are willing to listen and consider carefully differing points of view. Let me say a few things about process. We began 12 months ago, as I mentioned, 3-hour meetings twice a month. Information gathering took place. 1,000 invitations were sent out. We had 2 public hearings where we had 27 witnesses testify, witnesses from law enforcement, from civil rights community, and also elected officials. We began to deliberate based upon their presentations and information provided and other information that we had gathered. We began drafting, then proofreading, then site checking. That, as you can imagine, was a long and arduous process. Let me say something about content of the report. 60 recommendations, 5 proposed research suggestions, and 7 proposed legislative agenda items. Each of these 72 items is important independently of the others. But I encourage all interested parties to carefully consider the report. I know that it is 100 pages long, but quite frankly, it is a document that contains extremely valuable information. This document reflects, and I believe this is the real strength of the report, and I cannot stress this more emphatically. This document is a unanimous document. 15 members have agreed not only on the 60 recommendations, but also on the 5 proposed research suggestions and 7 proposed legislative agenda items. You cannot get 2 lawyers in the same room to agree on 1 sentence most of the time. We have 15 individuals agreeing on a 100-page document. Individuals of different perspectives, with different constituencies, with different concerns, and they are all unanimous on this document. Lock, stock, and ECW cartridge. Let me talk a little bit about the value of actually, let me continue to talk about content before I get to value. Let me talk about the 60 recommendations. 60 recommendations are designed for law enforcement personnel and agencies. They speak to 6 different areas, subject areas. 1, planning and implementation. 2, training. 3, use of force. 4, medical care. 5, reporting and investigation. And 6, monitoring and data collection. The 5 proposed research suggestions speak to law enforcement personnel and agencies, as well as the medical community. It is critical that elected officials have additional information on the physiological effects of ECWs, information on their benefits and drawbacks compared to other weapons in order to make more informed judgments about legislative decisions. There are 7 proposed legislative agenda items designed primarily for members of the General Assembly. The 7 items speak to 3 subject areas: training, 2nd, data collection, compilation, and analysis, and 3rd, civilian regulation. Let me speak to the value of the report. There is a perception by some that ECWs are less dangerous than they actually are. There is a perception by others that ECWs are more dangerous than they actually are. Put simply, the value of this report, and there are a number of values, but put simply, the value of this report is that it adds a strong dose of reality to these misperceptions. A very strong dose of reality. Let me quickly summarize. In many ways, this is an amazing document. It is the first or second statewide examination of ECW use in the United States. The task force was diverse in terms of race, gender, ethnicity, and viewpoint. The task force membership was broad in terms of the constituencies that were represented at the table. The task force process was open and inclusive in terms of input. Anybody and everybody was allowed to provide voice at the hearings or to attend. The report is comprehensive in its coverage and in-depth in its analysis. And finally, it is timely in its delivery. We were asked to provide a report before the end of the year. We have done so, and we have done so in a timely manner because we feel it is important, not only for Maryland citizens to have a chance to review this document, but also for the legislature to quickly consider and perhaps implement these proposals. In my opinion, my humble opinion, broad adoption of the full recommendations of this task force will not only reduce injuries, will not only improve community police relations, but in my humble opinion, they may save lives. And that is a reality that I think all Maryland citizens should welcome. With that said, we will hear from my vice chair, Professor Byron Warnken. He will add a few comments. And then we will, of course, present the report to Attorney General Gansler, and he will make a few remarks, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers.
Thank you, Michael. There is very little that I need to add because Mike HIgginbotham has just done a great job in a short period of time, pretty much telling you everything you need to know. I do have just a few thoughts. You know, there was a tragedy that led to all of this. There was a taser death in Frederick County that led to concern. That concern was voiced by the NAACP. To their credit, they came forward to press for information and answers. Then, to the credit of the Attorney General of Maryland, Douglas Gansler, he did not blow them off. He immediately responded to that and said, yes, you are right. This needs to be looked into. We need to learn a lot. And he established this task force. And then the brilliant thing he did was choosing my colleague, Michael HIgginbotham, because Mike may look like a mild-mannered academic, but boy, he must have been a drill sergeant in a last life, because he really ran the task force hard to be able to get this thing out timely. And Mike commented that he was a deer in the headlights when he started. So was I, and I think everybody on the commission, on the task force, with the exception of those from law enforcement. Yeah, we knew a little bit. I mean, we knew something about tasers, but none of us were really educated. And the great thing the task force did was it started with education, meaning we brought in the industry to have them educate us. We then brought in the law enforcement community to have them educate us. And we were great cross-examiners. And of course, we learned a lot through all of the witnesses that came forward during either of the two open hearings that we had. But although Mike said it, I think it needs emphasizing one more time. The fact of the success was not only getting bright people who were hardworking, but getting together every stakeholder to the table. The fact that you had sworn law enforcement, the fact that you had the medical community, the fact that you had lawyers, both prosecutors and non-prosecutors, the fact that you had professors, the fact that you had stakeholders such as the NAACP and the ACLU. So really, everybody whose opinion was worth listening to, we think we had. And if we didn't, they were invited to and came forward at our hearings. And then members of this committee who literally went round the clock toward the end, getting this project out. And of course, many of these people, particularly ones in private practice, they sacrificed because Mike said we came in on time and under budget. We came in under budget because we had no budget. All of these people volunteered their time, and that's what people do. And I want to acknowledge all of their efforts in volunteering, because literally there were a lot of meetings, a lot of hearings. I had no idea where we would be going when we started, but I probably am not overstating the case when I tell you that 6 months from now, 18 months from now, around this country, this report, this study, as thorough as it is, as well documented as it is, this study will probably serve as the basis in any community, any state, anywhere around the country, because it is so comprehensive. I mean, if you were going to study electronic weapons, you would be foolish to not start with this report, because pretty much all of the issues are addressed. And I'm recommending to the United States Senate that it hire all of these people, if they want to get health care fixed up, that the ability for people to bring divergent interest to the table and compromise. Not everybody was happy with we'd be foolish to think everybody was happy with every word in there, but there were legitimate debates, legitimate compromise to do what Mike said, to produce a significant document with significant recommendations, legislative recommendations, and have every one of those stakeholders be able to say, yes, I agree with that. I can sign off that. And a lot of times it was toward the end working out language that solved all the concerns of all of the people. And I will say, I was delighted and proud to be a part of a group where it was very intellectual discussion. People disagreed. We knew people would disagree. But never was there any personal attacks, never animosity. It was just wonderful sitting around that table with a Michael HIgginbotham kind of as the choir director as we worked our way through and discussed it. No one was ever denied the opportunity to offer their input. Otherwise, I think the product would be tarnished. The product is not tarnished. It's about as thorough as you can get. I'm honored to have played a role, and again, I want to give the real credit where it is, which really is Mike and the people on the committee, and I was not one of them, who were the prime drafters. And I also want to acknowledge that we did have a liaison with Attorney General Gansler's office in the form of Mr. Carl Snowden, who is in the Attorney General's office and served as a member of our committee and kind of served that liaison. In any event, I am delighted at this point to introduce to you my friend and respected colleague and my Attorney General, Douglas Gansler.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here and taking the time to be here, and obviously particularly the task force. And I met with them yesterday briefly to thank them privately, and I want to thank them publicly for all the work they did. This was, as been said, a diverse, obviously demographically diverse group, but also diverse in mind and thought, and to be able to bring this kind of collection of people together to come up with this unanimous, comprehensive report full of recommendations, research, follow-up, and legislative ideas is really Herculean in the way in which they went about it. And it couldn't have been done without having two brilliant leaders, and Mike HIgginbotham and Byron Warnken. So I'm very grateful to you both for doing this. I'm grateful to the university for allowing us to be here today. And as is mentioned, I'm cheap and we have no money. And we did not pay them to do this. So thank you for allowing us to take their time. I also want to thank Carl Snowden. As has been mentioned, this is the second task force that we have done since I've been the Attorney General here in Maryland. And I'm always a little cynical about task forces because they're usually something that are done to put off an issue. Both the task force that we've assembled, the first one was on voting irregularities that occurred in the past few elections, and then this task force, the reports that have come out of that have been monumental and instrumental in making real change. And Carl Snowden has been the liaison for us as the head of our Civil Rights Division in doing that. The impetus for my thought of creating this task force was, in fact, an incident in Frederick and brought to us by the NAACP. But it always struck me, even talking to law enforcement, about the lack of protocol, uniformity, the lack of uniformity in protocol, data collection, training in the use of tasers or electronic weapons throughout the state of Maryland. Some police departments had them, some police departments did not have them, and right there said something. And then the question is, within each department, what were the protocols for their use? What was the training that they were given? And some departments, and we actually had a big department and a small department represented here on our task force, to show and to highlight some of those differences in just resources alone. And so we were able to, in the task force, in the report, it does outline those differences. And not only does it deal with law enforcement in terms of protocol and training, but also in civilian use and regulation of electronic weapons. So it is very comprehensive. It does the very difficult task of balancing public safety and fairness issues. The group worked incredibly hard, as has been mentioned, and spent a lot of hours doing this and listening to public comment. But that's the only way this could have been done, because there was no roadmap, there was no recipe on how to do this. The charge was broad. Figure it out. Figure out what we ought to be doing with electronic weapons so that we can disseminate this to all the legislators, but also to every law enforcement department in the state of Maryland, so they can use it in their implementation of electronic weapons and their use in the future. The task force took the jobs very seriously. They worked very hard. They spent many hours on this, and I appreciate their hard work. My office will send this report along with a letter to every member of the General Assembly. We will send it to every member of the law enforcement community, including the Maryland State Police and the Department of Public Safety and Corrections. The use of tasers has become a hot and sometimes very divisive issue. We set up this task force to help wade through the facts and the fiction and to draw the balance, a very difficult one, between public safety and fairness. I believe this task force did an excellent job in culling through those issues in a very in-depth way. They probed the top, they probed the bottom, they listened to all sides and came out with this unanimous report. The report has common sense recommendations. I, for one, look forward to helping support legislation, that the 7 pieces of legislation that are put forward in this, and to working with law enforcement and the community in implementing the 60 recommendations. So with that, I thank you. We have not a lot of money, but we have certificates for each of you on the task force, which we'll hand out after we take a few questions from anyone who might have them. And I guess bring Professors Higginbotham and Warnken back up to the podium, since it's the only mic that works, and we can address questions from up here.
Are you speaking specifically about tasers or other electronic weapons,
There are primarily 2 manufacturers of electronic weapons now, and I believe that Taser International has a large share of that market. This report applies to all electronic weapons in use, irrespective of the manufacturer, and it also applies to not only law enforcement, police and sheriff's departments, but I also think it has applicability to corrections officers. We primarily wrote it for police and sheriff, but in terms of correction, in terms of detention, and also detention aspects that the sheriff's department runs, we think that many of the recommendations will be applicable to them as well.
But, and if I can add, tasers and electronic weapons for most people are the same. Tasers, the brand, and electronic weapons are the product. But what the task force did is also not only to address what is on the market today and use today, but future electronic weapons as well.
Can you address, talk about certain situations and certain groups of people who make the use of the taser more at risk? The elevated positions, pregnant women, for example. Can you just discuss that a little bit?
Sure, and I will ask one of my colleagues, Kerry Hansel, to come up because he actually drafted the part of the report that deals most carefully and closely with that. So I will ask him to come up and speak on that because I think he can speak from a much more informed position than I can. But let me repeat the question. That's the first thing, because some people might not be able to hear that. The question dealt with elevated uses of force. What are the circumstances that might elevate a use of force in terms of an electronic weapon? And I'll ask Kerry Hansel to respond to that.
Thank you, Professor. And I think from the task force, I would thank the Attorney General for the opportunity to have served. Each of us found it very much a privilege. I thank both of the professors for their fine leadership. It was an honor to serve the Attorney General, and it was an honor to serve with these gentlemen. And I know every single one of the people on the task force would agree with that. I'd answer the question by way of background, to point out that the task force found that tasers can and do cause death and serious injury. On the other hand, they are less lethal than firearms. So our job was to strike the balance between those two extremes. Part of what we looked at is the question of under what circumstances is there potentially a heightened risk of death or serious injury as a result of the use of this device. And those circumstances include individuals in elevated areas, people who may be in other environments where the use of the taser is dangerous, environments with combustible vapors, environments where someone is swimming in a lake and may lose physical control as a result of the taser and drown. So those environmental factors are impacted when the person is impacted with the taser and loses muscular control. If they're on an elevated surface, they may fall to injury or death. If they're in water, they may drown. There are also individualized factors related to the person themselves. They may have a heart condition. They may be a thin person with a thin chest wall. They may have other individualized factors like pacemakers that may make them especially susceptible to risk from these devices. And one of the key findings of the report is that all of these factors have to be trained. In other words, law enforcement, and we served with many fine representatives of law enforcement, and I believe very strongly that they and others do what they're trained to do and what they're asked to do with honor. And when they do that, they have to be trained and told that this device can and does, in certain circumstances, cause death or serious injury, and therefore it has to be placed properly in their training on the use of force continuum. One of the issues is that previously some of the training didn't necessarily disclose in great detail all of the risks, and I think one of our findings was that explaining those risks to good officers will lead to good and fair deployments and good use of what is really an excellent tool for law enforcement, but one that is less lethal and not non-lethal. Thank you.
Just one brief follow-up on that. It's an imperfect line to figure out the distinction between deadly force and non-deadly force. The Supreme Court answered the question in 1985 relating to when can a law enforcement officer, under the Fourth Amendment limitation, when can a law enforcement officer use deadly force? What Kerry is pointing out is that we determined on the task force that there are certain scenarios that because of the facts of that scenario, even though electronic weapons are less than firearms, for example, and therefore may not typically be at that deadly force level, there are certain circumstances where you really need to treat it like it's deadly force because for that particular individual it may be. So we're dealing with that continuum of deadly force, less than deadly force, force below that, and we're saying there are certain circumstances that this situation is just as bad as if you were using deadly force, and therefore should be treated at an elevated level.
I have two things. One, do you know whether it is the first or second report of its kind in the country?
I can't speak for certain. I thought it was the first statewide examination of the use of electronic weapons. There have been a number of cities that have had specific examinations of particular incidents where electronic weapons were used. I think Pittsburgh and Houston are two of those cities. But I was told that there was a statewide examination, perhaps in California, and we were going to look into that over the last couple of days. So I haven't gotten an answer for sure, but it's clearly one of the first, if not the first, statewide examination.
And then I was wondering to hear from somebody in law enforcement.
Delighted to call up Chief Johnson, of the Baltimore County Police, to speak, and then we will have other law enforcement members if they would like to speak as well.
Well, good morning, and again,
Sorry, I have a question for you.
yes, sir.
One of your primary concerns is the safety of your officers. So is there anything in this report that you feel jeopardizes that, or takes away maybe a tool that you could be using?
Well, this report does not take away the tool, and I'll make that very clear. Electronic controlled devices have presented a very valuable tool for law enforcement that have reduced officer injury, have reduced injury to the individual we take into custody if used properly, if used within policy. And I believe this report presents model policy, procedure, and investigation to effectively use this very, very valuable tool. I can tell you as a young officer, I wish I had this when I worked the road. It certainly would bring many incidents to a very swift closure and, again, reduce injury to officers and citizens.
I'd just like to add something to flip that on for Chief Johnson. The other side of it is, in Maryland, citizens can get tasers and electronic weapons, and we're really some of the recommendations in the report involve sort of making sure we get that those don't fall in the wrong hands, because they can actually be used against police officers, and want to actually protect officers through the regulation and sale of these electronic weapons a little bit.
You brought up a point. Is this one of the legislative items you're hoping to cover? And if so, if you could elaborate on those.
As I said, there were 7 legislative agenda items. Several of those deal with civilian regulation. One of the fascinating things that came up during the open hearings, and we had 27 individuals testify in 2 separate hearings, almost universally, law enforcement, civil rights community, elected officials, almost universally, they were against unregulated civilian access. And most of them stated very strongly that they would not like to see civilian access at all. Here in Maryland, we have a recent piece of legislation that permits civilian access. So what we did on the task force is to say 2 things. One, the General Assembly should seriously consider civilian access in general. They need to go in and carefully think about whether or not the benefits outweigh the drawbacks to civilian access. But secondly, if civilian access is agreed upon, there needs to be serious regulation of access for ECWs in civilian hands. And so our proposals provide regulation of that access in terms of licensing, background checks, those kinds of things.
I'm just trying to understand, why would you want it in civilian hands?
I think, as Professor Higginbotham said, most people don't want them in civilians' hands, and that was sort of the feedback that the task force got. The flip side of that is there was a law passed, I believe last year, that puts these in, allows access to civilians of electronic weapons. So it's on the books. Now the question is, it hasn't been there long enough to have enough data to understand their use and their dangerousness in terms of how they've been actually used in public, and some of the recommendations address that in terms of data collection. But the bigger issue is sort of how do you make sure, if you're going to have them, and for whatever reason the legislature decided to let people have access to them, how are you going to regulate them and make sure that they're being used to protect somebody's home, for example, and not to commit crimes?
There are 12 states that prohibit civilian access. 12 states currently that prohibit civilian access. As far as I know, the others do not have specific prohibitions statewide. Of course, there are various counties within Maryland that have also prohibited ECWs, and I believe Baltimore County is one of those.
Chief Johnson, I was curious, based on this report, is there anything that Baltimore County Police will do differently? Is there anything that's going to change about your policies based on this?
There are certain training requirements that we believe should be institutionalized across the state. We will look at some of those recommendations. In addition, aftercare, investigation, this presents a very comprehensive report on how to best use this tool to reduce injury to officers and, just as importantly, reduce injury to citizens.
And also for Mr. Gansler, I'm just curious, there's been a lot of coverage of different cases around the state. What was it about this Ralph Gray case that really captured your attention and I guess sparked the report that we have?
Well, I think it's sort of the same with all of us. We all, in particular, and even the press in the room. I think many of us had heard about electronic weapons. Many of us had heard of the use of tasers. We all had heard of death here and a death there, and sort of the circumstances surrounding that. But in the conversations with people in the wake of the case in Frederick, it became more clear to me as we asked some questions. And I, of course, was not Attorney General prior to that. I was the state's attorney. When I was state's attorney, we were looking at the individual case and to determine whether there was any wrongdoing perpetrated in that particular case by the officer leading to the death or not. But as Attorney General, you were able to sort of consider more of a statewide view of this issue, and by asking some questions, it became quickly clear to us that there was no statewide regulation of the use of electronic weapons in terms of not only who's using them, but how they're being used and how those people are being trained that do use them. So that different law enforcement agencies have them and don't have any training at all. Some have elementary training and some have more sophisticated training. But we wanted to provide guidance to every law enforcement agency in the state of Maryland that's using them now or considering using them. What are the best practices? What is available out there? What are the best practices for you as an agency to use these tasers to reduce the incidences of death, but also to use them effectively as a law enforcement tool? Because there's certainly far more cases where you would rather have had a police officer use an electronic weapon than a gun, than the cases where, the few cases where somebody actually has died from getting hit with a taser, and almost all of those cases involve somebody with a precondition, if you will.
And do you think this will really make a difference? I mean, when do you think we could start seeing some of these recommendations, adopted?
Well, I think that it's interesting. You have the ACLU, the NAACP, and law enforcement, along with the other folks on the task force, and you're thinking, well, there's going to be some pretty controversial recommendations here. The legislative recommendations don't seem to me to be controversial at all. So I would think that I would hope that they would be passed, including the data collection component, because we often talk about things like this without really having the facts behind us. And I think that and as the earlier question pointed out, we've only allowed civilian access to these things for a very, very short period of time, less than a year, and and most police departments haven't been using them for too long either. So data collection will be part of it. How are they used? When are they used? And what are the results of the use? The consequences of the use? So I think that will actually come in quickly. And then some of the training components of it, I think, will be put in place too. Because it sort of works the other way as well. Now that this report is out there and available and so comprehensive and detailed, law enforcement agencies use tasers and not look at this report at their risk, because they have to at least be aware of what is in here, and the goal here was to provide them with the best practices, and I think that does that.
Are there other questions for law enforcement before I let Chief Johnson go back to his seat?
Yeah, how about, I was just reading the use of force recommendation. I was wondering how this, reading that, so it seems to be on a par with handguns. I was wondering what the distinction is, particularly with number 30, officers should be permitted to use ECWs when an individual poses an imminent threat of physical injury to themselves or others. Is it on par with what we now understand as the restrictions on use of handguns, use of deadly force?
Well, I'll briefly respond, and I'm going to step back. Any well-trained officer in the state of Maryland today uses a continuum or escalation of force protocol, everything from verbal commands, officer presence. And this tool, this very valuable tool for law enforcement, falls short of the level of using a handgun.
One of the things that I learned a great deal on during the course of this 12-month period was that an electronic weapon is a less lethal weapon, but nonetheless, it is still a lethal weapon. And there was a great deal of discussion and debate about how to characterize an ECW. Is it non-lethal? Is it less than lethal, or is it less lethal? And the task force came to the opinion and the finding that it is less lethal. Now, what that means to me is, and the message that I think it should send out to law enforcement and to the civil rights community as well as others, is that when an ECW is used, sometimes serious injury and deaths occur. ECWs have been used on numerous occasions where no injuries have occurred at all. And this message needs to get out. And that's what I was saying earlier about perception that an ECW is more dangerous or less dangerous than it actually is. ECWs have been used many, many times in an effective way when no injuries, serious or otherwise, have occurred. There are a number of studies that are cited in the report that actually provide statistical analysis on this. And the studies go from, I believe, 0.3% to 0.05% in terms of the time that serious injuries or death occurs after an ECW has been used. So the reality is that serious injury or death occurs very infrequently in terms of the number of uses of an ECW. On the other hand, we all have to understand that death and serious injury do result in rare circumstances when ECWs are used. There is also a debate about whether or not the ECW is the proximate cause of many of these deaths. And that is something that I think was very difficult for non-medical personnel to grapple with. There are 8 deaths that have occurred in Maryland since 2004 as a result of an ECW being discharged. 8 deaths. anytime someone dies, it is a tragedy for that individual, for that individual's family, and for the officer involved. It is a tragedy for all involved parties. There is disagreement about whether or not in the medical community, the ECW is a direct or indirect or is not a cause at all of many of these deaths. And that is something that the report speaks to very carefully. And that is another reason why we would like to see additional research done to determine the results, the physiological effects of ECW discharges. I think it will be very critical in terms of helping the legislature formulate responses to the question that you ask.
Unless there's a pressing other question from the press, as I say in evidentiary law, the document speaks for itself. So you have the document there. Members of the task force will be available for any follow-up questions. Is there any other question that you just need to ask now? Okay. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all your help. And at this time, I'm going to walk over and give the certificates to the members of the task force. Thank you. No.
Members of the media, University of Baltimore is about to start ticketing for news vans, apparently where they're parked. Just wanted to let you know.
Task force, where are we doing our team picture? Picture with you. Yeah, why don't you up there with the background? Everybody holding onto their boards?
Everybody gather in. We need some fill-in over here, right?
Tall ones in the back.
The tall ones in the back.
Well, that's never me.
I just always move to the front.
Uniforms on each end.
Uniforms on each end, bookends.
Yours all across the squeeze. We gotta squeeze.
Gotta squeeze in, folks.
I'm gonna see it. No, you're short.
Take these. These.
But you're the only one,
Oh, better. I don't want to block folks, though.
Can't see my camera. I can't see you, so. Hi, Carl. Yeah, there you go. All right. Good to see everybody. Gonna do a couple. One more.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Very good. That's great. Thank you for all your time and effort on this. And we'll get with, so Mike, who's gonna get with Chanel? Just you and Byron?
And Cindy,
Okay.
Vernon.
So we'll just get a time and then whoever can come, comes.
Absolutely.
That's good. Thank you. I appreciate it. How was it, use that press conference?
Stay on.
They were tight on that.
Thank you, man, on the stuff.
Thanks, Carol. You're good. Just the bad guys. Keep the good ones out. Hey, Brian, I'll see you at home. Thanks, guys. We'll get together. Yeah. Yeah. I don't get to speak, but I don't want to. Thank you. Happy holidays, Mike. Thank you. This is great. This is really good.
Okay.
You know, you may want to have to see if you ain't got anything, because at this point, it's getting desperate. You're trying to get the tape out?
Yeah, so I just hit
Eject.
stop and then,
Well, hit stop first, yeah, and then eject. But, you know, I have to, you know, I was having real problems.
nothing in there.
Oh, maybe your technician got it. Was it a videotape or a CD? They took it.
Oh, they already took it?
Yeah, apparently they have
He
it.
said he was coming back at midnight, I mean at noon.
Okay. What's that down below?
Right here?
No, look below there, there's a tape. No, look below on the cabinet, on the shelf. See what says Maxwell?
Yeah.
Is that the tape?
That'd be it.
Did he label it?
It was a DVD.
Oh, it's a DVD. Well, no, then you'll probably have to see him. It's not.
He said he would come back at 12.
Yeah, well, he might be doing something to label it, or put something on it. Because this is your. Is this a recordable progressive scan? No. It wouldn't be. This is the. No. They have probably a control room.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and they have to burn it. It would be on the computer. Yeah, I mean, the computer would burn it. This.
All right, he said he'd come back at 12.
Yeah, he'll supply it to you. Yeah, okay, I better walk up and see Jose then, since he's up there.
Did he say he was gonna be there?
No, he told me he wanted me to ride with him to Annapolis.
At what time?
Oh, after this, I guess.
Oh, okay.
He didn't grab me when he left out of here. Do you have his phone number? I mean, do you have your cell phone?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, call him and ask him what he wants me to do. Or if you're going up to your office, I'll just walk up there, and if he's there. Yeah, you're gonna be prepared to get a lot of requests from probably state governments. Because probably Gansel will get the request, but he'll flip them out to the task force. Because when you get a report out like this, everybody wants to pick your brain when they start to do theirs.
Right.
And they want more than just pulling it off the internet. They want the people that have the expertise. I want to be broadcasting. Oh, this mic is not on, right?
Might be.
Oh, yeah. It's on. Let's see. Who's it? How do I work your phone here? Oh, there he is. So, what are you doing? You just heading home?
No, I gotta do some work and then I gotta call. I gotta call this dude
Oh, that's the one you
from News Media.
Oh, you have to go to the studio?
Nah, I gotta call him.
Oh, just a voice in?
Yeah.
Hey, Jose, this is Robert. I'm trying to track you down, if you still wanted me to ride with you. I have Mike's phone. I don't have a cell phone with me. I'll swing up to your office. Hopefully you'll be there at some point. Bye-bye.
Is there a class? Nah, man, school's over.
I don't know what happened to him. Are you going up to your office?
Yeah, I was waiting for the guy to come back to give me the DVD.
Oh, okay. Well, is his name on his door?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You're on 4, right? Mm-hmm. Let me walk up here and see what happens.
You wanna call his office? Cause he's not, I mean, if he's not answering, he's not
Yeah, I
up. You
can
wanna
call
call his office?
Yeah, what's it? 837 4398. Well, I don't know what happened to him. I think he was supposed to. Take the call, take the.
Jose, man, Bob wanna talk to you.
Yeah, what do you want me to do? Okay, very good. I'll see you. Right. Very good. I'll see you there in a half hour. No, he's got stuff to do, actually. He's saying he's got to go and, he's got to do some things. Yeah, yeah, we ride and talk. I don't have, I'm out, I got the suit on, I don't have anything to do. Yeah. Okay. Fine, that sounds good, thank you. I'd like to, have the opportunity. All right, bye-bye. Okay. I get nervous parking up on that bridge. Yeah, I always see that glass.
Park on the bridge?
Yeah, I always see that glass up. Well, that's where you say to park. Yeah, but I always see that. No, I don't even think on the seats, and I also don't like to leave it there too long.
Actually, it's real safe.
Well, I would think they patrol it, and it's probably in view of one of the cameras from UV.
You just can't leave stuff on the seat because
They will break in. Why doesn't the city put a camera?
Huh?
Why doesn't it put I'm sure that the UV cameras can see part of it, but why doesn't the city put a dedicated camera on the bridge?
Money?
Well, they got these cameras everywhere else. That's one that could really be useful. I mean, there are a lot of people that park on the bridge. A lot of the property that's there. Not UB, I'm talking about the city's police department cameras. Yeah, so you'll get a lot of inquiries from this, and then we'll have to watch the news, because I think they'll probably have a nice little piece for you on the news. Yeah, I think they'll cover it. Electronic weapons is, that's what I was trying to tell you. It's hard for me to think of you doing something on something electronic, and then an electronic weapon. And when you start making those comments, I say, this is coming from a man. No, I mean, by being a year on the task force, you've learned about it. But did you ever get to discharge a taser?
No.
See,
They gave a demonstration.
yeah, but you didn't discharge it, though.
No.
See, have you ever discharged a weapon at all?
No, I mean, BB gun maybe.
Other than a BB gun? Okay, well, see, that's what I'm trying to, I mean, but you've become an expert now in the area. I mean, I don't think you will get, see, Gansler, he can't, he's the Attorney General, so he can only do so much when he gets calls about it. So what'll happen, he's gonna flip. There's gonna be like TV inquiries and stuff that you're gonna have to go. Yeah, they'll send them to you because.
Take a sit down. I'm gonna call it Chris.
Oh, okay.
Wait for our DVD.
You want to leave your stuff there? Is that?
I'll just go right here. So,
I gotta kill about 15 minutes.
yeah, we'll go to my office as soon as you come in. Give us the DVD. See if you come in next week.
How's that over, sir? I know you've been parking here for 15 years.
I never leave anything here.
Well, I don't have anything out there, but you get a nut, you know, they can't break in, they see the lawn, they just try to do vandalism. You're gonna get action on
Think I'm
this.
gonna get smashed?
I do, because it's you know, it's state stuff that gets picked up. We used to always, you know, when I'm on a consumer education